Camilla Dawson shivered as she pulled the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, the bitter Chicago wind cutting through the cracked subway terminal. She sat curled on a cold metal bench, her swollen belly pressing against her ribs as she adjusted her position, trying to find even the smallest bit of comfort. The rhythmic screech of trains coming and going blended with the murmurs of late-night commuters, but no one paid her any attention. She had mastered the art of being invisible. Her fingers traced slow circles over her belly, a quiet reassurance to the two tiny lives growing inside her. They were coming soon. Too soon. The sharp pains in her back had started hours ago, dull at first, but now clawing their way through her with more intensity. She pressed a trembling hand against the dampness on her dress, her heart thudding when she realized it wasn't just sweat. Her water hadn't broken, but something was wrong. She couldn't stay here. Her eyes darted to the street beyond the subway entrance, the towering skyscrapers of downtown Chicago glowing under the city lights. Somewhere in those high rises, people sat in warm apartments, laughing, drinking wine, complaining about parking spaces, and late emails. Camilla had once lived in that world, not lavishly, but comfortably. Now, she was just another statistic, another nameless woman struggling to survive. She took a shaky breath, pressing a hand against her belly. "It's okay, babies. Just a little longer." A sudden wave of pain shot through her, stealing her breath. Her body lurched forward as she gritted her teeth, trying not to cry out. She couldn't panic. Not now. A man in a security uniform walked by, his gaze flicking toward her before quickly looking away. She knew that look. Pity mixed with discomfort. He wouldn't help. No one would. Another contraction rippled through her, stronger this time. She sucked in a breath, gripping the bench, her mind racing. She needed to get to a hospital. But how? Her fingers fumbled in her pocket, pulling out her last few crumpled bills. Not enough for a cab. She clenched her jaw, swallowing the helplessness rising in her throat. This was it. If she didn't find help, she would give birth right here, on a dirty subway bench, alone. A voice cut through the noise. "Mom, are you okay?" Camilla's head snapped up. A young man, probably no older than 20, stood a few feet away, holding a phone in his hand. He looked uncertain, but concerned. I think I need an ambulance," she rasped, wincing as another contraction clenched her body. His eyes widened. Okay, hold on." He fumbled with his phone, pressing it to his ear. "Yeah, I'm at the Jackson Blue Line station. There's a woman here, she's pregnant, and I think she's in labor." Camilla exhaled shakily, the tension in her chest loosening just a fraction. Someone was helping. Minutes blurred together. The blaring sound of sirens filled the tunnel, bright red and blue lights flashing against the tiled walls. Two paramedics rushed toward her, their voices calm, efficient. "Ma'am, we've got you." Strong hands helped her onto the stretcher. The second she lay back, exhaustion overtook her. Her limbs heavy, her vision swimming. "Just hold on, okay?" one of them said, securing the straps. "We're taking you to Northwestern Memorial." The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the world around her faded into the wail of sirens. "Dr. Harrington, you're needed in NICU room 4. Hudson Harrington barely glanced up from his chart as he strode down the hallway of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the fluorescent lights casting sharp angles on his crisp white coat. "What's the case?" 29-year-old woman, no prenatal care, possible preterm labor, the nurse beside him said. "Homeless, found in a subway station." Hudson's steps faltered for half a second before he caught himself. Homeless, pregnant, alone. It wasn't his case. He dealt with newborns, not their mothers, but something about it struck a nerve. He shook it off. This was just another patient, another name on a file. That was all it would ever be. He pushed through the double doors into the NICU, expecting to see the usual scene. Monitors beeping, nurses moving quickly but methodically. The quiet hum of premature life struggling to hold on. But when his eyes landed on the woman in the hospital bed, something shifted. She was gripping the sheets, eyes squeezed shut, her dark hair clinging to her damp skin. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her breathing ragged. But it wasn't just her condition that made Hudson pause. It was the sheer strength in her expression, the determination in the way she fought against the pain. "Vitals?" he asked, keeping his voice level. "Contractions every 5 minutes, blood pressure slightly elevated," the nurse reported. Her eyes fluttered open then, locking onto his. "You're the doctor," she murmured, her voice hoarse. He nodded. "Dr. Hudson Harrington. We're going to take care of you and your babies." Something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, but layered beneath exhaustion and uncertainty. "You're in good hands," he added, surprising himself with the softness in his voice. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. I can't do this alone." Hudson stared at her, the weight of those words settling deep in his chest. Alone. He knew that feeling. He had lived with it every single day. And for the first time in years, he felt something crack inside him, something he wasn't sure he wanted to break. The sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic filled Camilla's lungs as she blinked awake, the rhythmic beeping of monitors pulling her from the haze of exhaustion. The overhead fluorescent lights felt harsh against her tired eyes, and for a moment she forgot where she was. But then the ache in her body and the dull throbbing in her abdomen reminded her. She was in a hospital. Her heart clenched as panic surged through her. The babies. She tried to sit up, but a firm, steady hand landed on her shoulder. "Take it easy. You're still recovering." Her gaze darted up, locking onto the same man from before. Dr. Hudson Harrington. His presence was striking. Tall, composed, his sharp jawline betraying little emotion, though his eyes held a kind of cool intensity that unsettled her. Camilla's lips parted, but no words came out. Hudson glanced at the monitor before speaking. "Your contractions have slowed. For now, we've managed to delay labor, but your body is under a lot of stress. You need rest." She barely heard him, her fingers curling into the stiff white sheets. "The babies, they're still inside," he said, his voice even, controlled. "We're keeping a close watch, but at 32 weeks, they'll need special care if they arrive early." Camilla exhaled shakily, her pulse still frantic. I thought I was losing them." His expression softened, just for a second, before it was gone. "You're not. But stress isn't helping either." Stress. As if she had a choice. She had no home, no money, no safety net. The weight of reality crashed over her all at once, pressing into her chest like a stone. Her voice wavered. I have nowhere to go after this." Hudson didn't react right away. He just studied her, his sharp blue eyes unreadable. And then he did something unexpected. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her bed, resting his hands on his knees. "Tell me something, Miss Dawson." His tone remained clinical, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity. "How long have you been homeless?" Camilla's stomach twisted. She hated that word. It felt like a brand, a scarlet letter she couldn't escape. But what was the point in lying? 6 months, she admitted, her fingers tightening around the blanket. "I was working at a diner before that. Rent went up. Hours got cut. I kept falling behind until..." She swallowed. "Until I couldn't catch up." Hudson was silent, listening, but offering no reaction. Camilla let out a humorless laugh. "Funny, isn't it? You spend your whole life doing the right thing, working, trying to stay afloat, but one wrong turn, and suddenly, you're nothing. Invisible." Something flickered in his expression. He looked away, exhaling slowly. "You're not invisible." His words caught her off guard, but before she could respond, the door swung open, and a woman in scrubs walked in, her expression warm yet businesslike. "Dr. Harrington, sorry to interrupt," she said, shifting her gaze to Camilla. "I'm Grace, one of the NICU nurses. We've got a plan in place for your babies in case they come early. Would you like to see the unit?" Camilla hesitated. A part of her was terrified to see the world her children might enter too soon, but another part of her needed to know. "Yes," she said softly. "Please." Grace gave a reassuring smile. "I'll get a wheelchair." Hudson stood abruptly, smoothing a hand over his coat. "I'll come too." Camilla frowned. "You don't have to." He met her gaze, unwavering. "I know." He left no room for argument. A few minutes later, Camilla found herself being wheeled through the quiet corridors of the hospital. The further they went, the more her anxiety built. "Here we are," Grace said as they entered the neonatal intensive care unit. Camilla's breath caught in her throat. The room was lined with small incubators, tiny babies connected to monitors, their fragile bodies rising and falling with each breath. Some were impossibly small, their skin nearly translucent. Parents sat beside them, some holding onto their little fingers, others simply watching, praying. Her throat tightened. "This is where they'll be," Grace explained gently. "If they come early, they'll have round-the-clock care. It's overwhelming at first, but we'll walk you through everything." Camilla nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Hudson stood beside her, his posture rigid, hands clasped behind his back. His gaze lingered on one of the incubators, something distant in his expression. "Have you been here before?" Camilla asked quietly. His jaw tightened. "Yes." There was something in the way he said it, something final. She didn't press. After a few moments, he cleared his throat and turned to Grace. "She'll need a place to go after discharge." Camilla stiffened. "I can figure something out." "Can you?" Hudson challenged, his tone calm but firm. Shame crawled up her spine. She hated feeling like a charity case, hated the way he was looking at her, like she was another problem to solve. Before she could snap back, he spoke again. "I have an extra room. It's yours until you get back on your feet." Camilla stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What?" "It's temporary," he clarified. "You need a safe place to stay, and my home has plenty of space. This isn't a favor, it's practical." She shook her head. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." His words settled between them, heavy with something she couldn't name. Grace shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. "It's not a bad idea, Camilla," she said gently. "You need rest. Stress isn't good for the babies." Camilla let out a shaky breath, her hands pressing against her stomach. This wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want to rely on a stranger, but could she really turn down help? Her babies needed stability, even if it meant swallowing her pride. Finally, she met Hudson's gaze. "Okay," she murmured, "just until I figure something out." His expression didn't change, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. Good. But as they left the NICU, Camilla couldn't shake the feeling that accepting this offer might change everything. The steady hum of the hospital elevator filled the silence as Camilla sat stiffly in the wheelchair, her hands curled into the fabric of her hospital gown. The weight of her decision pressed against her chest like an anchor. She was about to step into a stranger's world, one filled with wealth, structure, and the kind of security she hadn't known in years. Beside her, Hudson stood motionless, his posture straight, hands tucked into the pockets of his pristine white coat. He hadn't spoken much since she'd agreed to stay at his home. Not a word about what it meant, not a single hesitation. It was as if offering a place to a homeless woman and her unborn children was no more inconvenient than adjusting a patient's medication. The door slid open with a soft chime, and Hudson stepped forward. "Your things will be brought down in a moment." Camilla forced herself to nod, her stomach knotting. She didn't have things, just a few worn clothes stuffed into a grocery bag, a wallet with barely enough for a meal, and an old phone with a cracked screen that barely held a charge. It was almost laughable to imagine bringing them into whatever mansion he lived in. She shifted in the wheelchair. "Are you sure about this?" Hudson's sharp blue eyes met hers, unreadable as ever. "I don't make offers I'm not prepared to follow through on." The automatic doors whooshed open, and the icy Chicago air hit her skin like a shock. A sleek black car sat waiting at the curb, its dark paint glistening under the hospital's fluorescent lights. Of course. She exhaled slowly, gripping the armrests of the wheelchair as she struggled to push herself up. Immediately, Hudson reached for her elbow, steadying her with a firm, practiced grip. "I can do it," she said quickly, her voice a little too sharp. His hand fell away without protest. "Then do it." A challenge. She gritted her teeth, planting her feet firmly against the pavement. Her body ached, her muscles weak from days of bed rest, but she forced herself to stand. She wobbled for half a second, but she stayed upright. Hudson didn't say anything, just opened the car door and waited. Camilla slid inside, her heart pounding. The silence stretched as Hudson rounded the car and slid into the driver's seat, pressing the ignition button. The engine purred to life, smooth and controlled, just like everything about him. As they pulled away from the hospital, she forced herself to speak. "You live alone?" "Yes." She nodded, glancing out the window as the streets blurred past. "Must be nice." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "It wasn't always." Camilla turned toward him, but he kept his eyes on the road, his expression unreadable. She could feel it again, that tension in the air, thick and unspoken. A man like him didn't have an empty house by accident. The drive was longer than she expected. The familiar cityscape of Southside faded into a different world, one with tree-lined streets and historic brownstones, their windows glowing warmly in the night. And then they pulled into a gated driveway, the wrought iron fence gliding open without a sound. Camilla swallowed. The house was massive, 3 stories of red brick and glass, with elegant black shutters and a grand front entrance flanked by polished stone steps. It looked untouched, as if it had been staged for a magazine spread rather than actually lived in. Hudson put the car in park. "It's late. You should rest." She hesitated. "Why are you doing this?" His fingers tightened on the steering wheel for the briefest second before he turned to face her. "Because you need help." Her chest ached at the simplicity of it. Because she needed help. Not because she deserved it. Not because he particularly wanted her here. Just because he had the resources to offer, and she had no other options. She let out a slow breath. "Okay." The front door opened without a creak, revealing a breathtaking foyer with high ceilings, a curved staircase, and floors that gleamed under the soft glow of a chandelier. Camilla hesitated in the doorway, her feet sinking into the plush carpet as she took it all in. "This is where you'll stay," Hudson said, leading her through a hallway and stopping in front of a door. She stepped inside cautiously. The guest room was more like a luxury hotel suite. Neutral-toned walls, a massive bed with crisp white linens, a fireplace built into the far wall. A large window framed the Chicago skyline in the distance. "I don't need all this," she murmured, her fingers brushing against the smooth wooden nightstand. Hudson crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "It's just a room, Camilla." She turned to face him. "To you, maybe." His gaze lingered on her for a moment, something unreadable flickering across his features before he straightened. "I have an early shift. if you need anything, Grace's number is on the counter." And just like that, he was gone. Camilla let out a shaky breath, pressing her hands against her stomach. "Well, babies, we're not in a subway station anymore." She sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. She knew she should sleep, knew she needed it. But as she lay down, staring at the ceiling, all she could think about was the man on the other side of the house, Hudson Harrington. Who was he really? And why did she have the strange, unsettling feeling that she wasn't the only one in this house trying to outrun their past? The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a golden glow across the room. Camilla stirred beneath the soft sheets, momentarily disoriented by the sheer luxury surrounding her. For a split second, she thought she was dreaming, that she would wake up back on the subway bench, cold and exhausted. But then, reality set in. The crisp scent of fresh linens, the quiet hum of the city beyond the massive window, the undeniable comfort of a bed that wasn't made for someone like her. She wasn't in the subway, she was in his house. Camilla exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against her belly. The twins were quiet this morning, but she knew they were there, growing, waiting. She had to be strong for them. She sat up, wincing slightly at the stiffness in her body. Her eyes drifted toward the nightstand where a glass of water and a small plate of fruit had been left. A folded note sat beside it. "Eat something. You need to keep your strength up." No signature, but she knew. Hudson. Camilla swallowed against the unexpected lump in her throat. She hadn't expected kindness. Not really. She had assumed his offer had been made out of obligation, a duty rather than a choice. But this was something else. She reached for a grape, chewing slowly as she tried to piece together what came next. She couldn't stay here forever. She needed a plan. A knock on the door made her jolt. "Come in," she called, quickly smoothing her hands over her oversized hospital-issued t-shirt. Grace stepped inside, her usual warm smile in place as she carried a small bag. "Morning, Mama," she greeted. "How's the 5-star treatment so far?" Camilla let out a dry chuckle. "I still don't believe I'm here." Grace placed the bag on the dresser. "Well, believe it. Hudson may be a closed book most of the time, but when he sets his mind on something, he follows through." Camilla frowned slightly. Why is he doing this? Grace hesitated, then shrugged. That's a question only he can answer. Camilla wasn't sure she'd ever get one. Grace reached into the bag and pulled out a set of fresh clothes. Leggings, a soft sweater, even warm socks. "I stopped by a shop on the way over. Figured you'd want something comfortable until you can get your things together." Camilla blinked, her throat tightening. "You didn't have to." "Please," Grace interrupted, with a playful eye roll. "It's the least I can do. Now go freshen up. You'll feel better once you're out of that hospital gear." Camilla hesitated, then nodded. This was kindness. She needed to stop questioning it and just accept it. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air as Camilla padded cautiously down the hallway, her new sweater hugging her body, providing a comfort she hadn't realized she'd been craving. The house was quiet. Eerily so. Every polished surface, every carefully placed decorative piece screamed controlled, calculated perfection. Her steps slowed as she entered the kitchen. It was as pristine as the rest of the house. Sleek marble countertops, top-of-the-line appliances, everything in its rightful place. And there, standing by the espresso machine, was Hudson. Unlike last night's kiss, he wasn't in a suit. His usual polished appearance had been replaced with something strangely human. A fitted charcoal sweater, sleeves pushed up to his forearms, soft-looking lounge pants, his dark hair slightly tousled. Camilla hesitated in the doorway. "Morning." Hudson glanced up, his expression as unreadable as ever. "You slept well?" She nodded, stepping further into the room. "Yeah, thank you, for the room, for the food." His gaze lingered on her for a fraction too long before he turned back to his coffee. "You don't have to thank me." Camilla crossed her arms. "I kinda do. You don't owe me anything. But you still—" She sighed, shaking her head. "I guess I just don't understand why." Hudson's fingers tightened slightly around the mug in his hand, but he didn't answer right away. Then, he finally spoke. "Because no one should have to go through what you're going through alone." Her breath hitched. It was the first real glimpse of something behind the carefully constructed walls he kept up. And before she could stop herself, she asked, "Is that what happened to you?" Hudson's jaw tensed. A flicker of something crossed his face. Pain, maybe, but it was gone before she could be sure. "This isn't about me," he said simply. A cold final statement. Camilla exhaled, nodding slowly. She wouldn't push. Not yet. Instead, she walked toward the counter, eyeing the coffee machine. "Do you mind if I—" He stepped aside, gesturing toward the machine. "Help yourself." She reached for a mug, but her hands fumbled slightly. Hudson noticed. "You should sit. I'll get it." Camilla opened her mouth to protest, but before she could, he had already taken her mug and began making her coffee. It was such a simple thing, and yet, no one had done something so effortless for her in a long time. A few minutes later, he placed the steaming cup in front of her. "You take it black." Camilla smirked. "What do I look like? A detective in a crime show? No, I need cream and sugar." Hudson's lip twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. He slid the sugar toward her, watching as she fixed her coffee just right before taking a slow sip. For a moment, there was only silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable, and that was unexpected. Later that afternoon, Camilla found herself sitting on the plush couch in the living room, staring out at the quiet street. She hadn't had this kind of stillness in a long time. No chaos, no hunger gnawing at her stomach, no fear of what would happen the next day. But the peace didn't last. A knock at the front door made her jump. Before she could even move, Hudson appeared from down the hall, his expression instantly shifting to something colder, sharper. Camilla frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" Hudson didn't answer. He strode toward the door, his posture tense as he pulled it open. And standing on the other side was John Harrington, Hudson's father. The older man stepped inside without invitation, his presence commanding, eyes flicking toward Camilla like she was an unexpected inconvenience. "This is her?" John asked, voice clipped. Hudson's jaw clenched. "Not now, John." But John wasn't done. His gaze settled on Camilla, assessing, calculating. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," he said coolly, "but whatever sympathy act you're pulling on my son, it ends now." Camilla's stomach twisted. The warmth she had started to feel in this house, it was gone in an instant, and suddenly she realized this wasn't just a temporary stay. This was a battle she hadn't even known she'd entered. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Camilla sat frozen on the couch, her fingers unconsciously curling into the soft fabric of her sweater. John Harrington's words still lingered in the air, sharp and deliberate, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, but whatever sympathy act you're pulling on my son, it ends now." Hudson's entire body tensed beside her. The room, once filled with an odd but fragile warmth, had turned cold. "John." Hudson's voice was low, controlled, but laced with warning. His father barely spared him a glance. His sharp, assessing gaze was locked on Camilla, studying her like a problem that needed to be solved. She swallowed hard, pushing past the knot forming in her throat. "I don't want anything from him." John tilted his head slightly, the ghost of a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, as if he'd heard this line before. "Is that right?" He turned his attention to Hudson. "You brought a homeless woman into your home." A pregnant one at that. How do you think this looks? Hudson exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. I don't care how it looks. John's expression darkened. You should. You have a reputation. Your career. You can't afford distractions, especially not ones that come with baggage. Camilla stiffened, a bitter taste rising in her mouth. Baggage. That was what she was to him. That was what her children were. Hudson's jaw clenched. You're out of line. John let out a humorless chuckle, shaking his head. I'm being realistic. I've worked too hard to watch you throw your life away over misplaced guilt. Camilla's brows furrowed. Guilt? The moment the word left her lips, Hudson's posture turned rigid. His father's gaze flickered toward her, and for the first time, something resembling amusement crossed his face. Oh, he didn't tell you. John's voice was smooth, almost mocking. This isn't the first time Hudson's tried to fix something that wasn't his to fix. Camilla's stomach twisted. What was he talking about? Enough. Hudson's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. His eyes burned with something unreadable, something dangerous. For the first time, John hesitated. A beat passed between them, unspoken and heavy. Then, with a sigh, he adjusted the cuffs of his perfectly tailored suit, exuding the effortless confidence of a man who was rarely challenged. Do what you want, John said coolly, but don't expect me to clean up the mess when it falls apart. And just like that, he turned and walked out the door. The click of it shutting behind him echoed through the space, leaving behind nothing but tension. Camilla let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her fingers trembling slightly. She turned to Hudson, her heart still hammering. What was he talking about? Hudson's gaze was locked on the door, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He didn't answer right away. Hudson, she pressed, her voice quieter now, almost uncertain. Finally he exhaled, dragging a hand through his hair. It's nothing. She let out a dry laugh. That didn't sound like nothing. His eyes met hers then, something guarded, something almost fragile lurking beneath the surface. For the first time, she saw it, the cracks in his carefully composed exterior. It's none of your concern, he said, finally, turning away. A sting of something she didn't quite recognize settled in her chest. Camilla wanted to let it go. She wanted to pretend that his past wasn't clawing at the edges of whatever strange understanding they had. But the way he refused to meet her gaze, the way his body remained taut, as if bracing for impact, it was her concern. Because she was living in his home. Because, whether she liked it or not, their lives were entangled now. And because, for some reason, she couldn't explain, she cared. She swallowed hard. Look, if me being here is causing problems for you. It's not, Hudson interrupted, turning to face her again. His voice was quieter now, but firm. My father and I have very different ideas of what's important. That's not your problem to worry about. Camilla studied him, searching for any cracks in his defenses. But Hudson Harrington was a fortress, tall, guarded, impenetrable. She let out a slow breath, nodding. Okay. But even as the tension slowly began to fade, one thing became painfully clear. She wasn't the only one in this house carrying ghosts. Later that evening, Camilla found herself standing in front of the large window in the guest room, staring out at the Chicago skyline. The city pulsed with life. Cars weaving through the streets, people moving about their nights, lights flickering in distant apartments. It felt surreal. This wasn't her life. Not really. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned just as Hudson stepped inside, his expression unreadable. I have something for you. Camilla frowned. What? Without a word, he stepped aside, revealing Grace standing in the hallway, holding a large paper bag. Camilla's brows furrowed as Grace stepped forward, setting the bag on the small desk. I figured you might need some essentials, Grace said with a smile. Toiletries, some maternity clothes, things for the babies. Camilla's breath hitched. Hudson shifted slightly. It's nothing major, just enough until you can get what you need yourself. She stared at the bag, emotions tightening in her throat. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't expected it. But it mattered. Her fingers brushed over the edge of the bag before she finally lifted her gaze to his. Thank you, she said softly, the words heavier than she expected. Hudson held her gaze for a long moment before he gave the smallest nod. Get some rest. And just like that, he was gone. Camilla let out a shaky breath, turning back to the window. This wasn't supposed to feel like home. So why did it? Camilla sat at the kitchen island, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, staring absently at the slow swirl of steam rising from the surface. The quiet of the house was almost unsettling. No rush of city sounds pressing in, no rumbling trains, no distant sirens. Just silence. She should have been grateful for the peace. Instead, it made her restless. The encounter with Hudson's father the night before still lingered in her mind. The way he had looked at her, like she was a complication, an obstacle to be removed. She had felt plenty of judgment in her life, but something about John Harrington's presence had unsettled her in a way she couldn't shake. More than that, it was what he had said. Hudson's guilt. What had John meant by that? And why had Hudson shut down the moment she had asked? The sound of footsteps broke through her thoughts. She looked up just as Hudson walked in, dressed in his usual crisp work attire. Dark slacks, a perfectly tailored shirt, sleeves pushed up just enough to make him look less like a doctor and more like someone who had just walked off the cover of a magazine. Camilla swallowed. Dangerous thought. Morning, he said, his voice even. She nodded, bringing the mug to her lips. You're leaving for work? Yes. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, not looking at her. Grace will be checking in later. It wasn't a question, just a fact. Camilla frowned slightly. Something was different. His posture, his voice, it all felt colder than before. The space between them had always been tense, but last night something had shifted, and now he was pulling away. She set her mug down, watching him closely. You're acting weird. Hudson stilled, his sharp blue eyes flicking toward her. Am I? Yes. She crossed her arms, tilting her head. Is this about your father? A flicker of something crossed his face, so brief she almost missed it. I told you, that's not your concern. Camilla narrowed her eyes. Right, because I'm just some woman in your guest room. That's how this works, right? I don't ask questions and you don't explain? He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. Camilla, no, really. She leaned forward slightly, her pulse quickening. You bring me here, into your world, and then the second I start to think, maybe, just maybe, you actually care, you shut down. His jaw tensed. You're reading too much into this. Her chest tightened. No, she wasn't. She had seen it, the flicker of warmth, the quiet concern in the way he made sure she ate, the way he had stepped between her and his father without hesitation. Fine. She pushed back her chair, standing. You don't owe me anything, Hudson. You want to pretend this? She gestured between them. Is nothing. Fine. I won't make that mistake again. She turned, ready to walk away, but his voice stopped her. I lost them. Camilla froze. His words hung heavy in the air, raw and unguarded. Slowly, she turned back to face him. What? Hudson's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment before he took a slow breath, as if steadying himself. When he looked up, something in his eyes had shifted. I had a wife, he said, his voice quieter now. And twins. A boy and a girl. He swallowed hard. 3 years ago. The air in the room felt different now, denser. Camilla's breath caught. 3 years ago. She could feel it, the weight of what he wasn't saying. She stepped forward slightly. Hudson, he shook his head once. It was an emergency C-section. Complications. I wasn't in the room when it happened. His voice cracked just slightly, but he forced himself to keep going. By the time I got there, it was too late. Camilla's heart clenched. It was too much, too real. She had spent months fearing that same fate. Hudson cleared his throat, straightening slightly. My father thinks I brought you here because I see them in you, that I'm trying to fix what happened. His gaze met hers, searching, cautious. Is that what you think? She didn't know how to answer that. Maybe, in some ways, Hudson had been pulled to her situation because of his past. Maybe a part of him had seen something familiar in her struggle. But as she stood there, looking at him now, not the polished doctor, not the distant benefactor, but the man beneath all of it, she knew the truth. No, she said softly. I don't. Hudson's shoulders eased just slightly, like he had been holding his breath without realizing it. Camilla hesitated before speaking again. You couldn't save them. His jaw tensed, but he nodded. Her chest tightened. She didn't know why, but she reached forward, resting her hand lightly on his arm. But you're here now, and I know that might not mean anything to you. But to me, it does. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, slowly, his fingers curled over hers, just for a second, just long enough for her to feel it, the warmth, the undeniable connection. But then, as quickly as it had happened, he pulled away, straightening his tie. I have to go. Camilla nodded, stepping back, and as he walked toward the door, she felt something shift inside her, something she wasn't sure she could ignore anymore. Because Hudson Harrington wasn't just a man trying to fix his past. He was a man still trying to survive it. The house felt different after Hudson left. Camilla sat by the window, staring out at the quiet Chicago street, her hands resting lightly on her belly. The weight of their conversation still lingered in the air, pressing against her chest. She had seen something in Hudson this morning. A crack in his carefully controlled world. For the first time since she met him, he hadn't been the untouchable, polished doctor who always had the right answer. He had been human, and it terrified her. Because she wasn't supposed to care. She wasn't supposed to feel this pull towards him, this quiet understanding that bound them together in ways neither of them were ready to admit. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. Camilla turned just as Grace stepped inside, her warm brown eyes scanning her carefully. Did he tell you? Grace asked, setting down a bag of groceries on the counter. Camilla exhaled slowly. Yeah. Grace sighed, leaning against the island. I figured it would come out eventually. Hudson doesn't talk about it. Not to anyone. Camilla swallowed. It explains a lot. Grace studied her for a moment before nodding. It does. She motioned to the bag. I brought you some fresh fruit, more tea. Figured you could use it. Camilla smiled softly. Thank you. Really. Grace waved a dismissive hand. You don't have to keep thanking me. Then she hesitated. How are you feeling? About being here? Camilla's fingers traced small circles against her belly as she considered the question. What was she supposed to say? That she was terrified? That she felt like she was balancing on a thin rope between survival and something she didn't understand? I don't know, she admitted. Grace nodded, as if she had expected that. That's okay, but if you do stay, just be careful. Camilla frowned. What do you mean? Grace hesitated. Hudson is, complicated. He has walls, thick walls. And if you start thinking he's the kind of guy who's going to let someone in just because he's being nice. I'm not, Camilla cut in, a little too quickly. Grace gave her a knowing look. Okay. Camilla exhaled, rubbing her temples. I know he's not. She trailed off, unsure how to put it into words. Grace sat down across from her. I've known Hudson for years. He's a good man. But his grief, it's buried so deep he doesn't even realize how much it still controls him. Camilla thought about the way Hudson had held her hand, just for a moment, before forcing himself to let go. The way he wanted to feel something, but didn't know how. I don't want to be another problem for him, she admitted quietly. Grace shook her head. You're not, but I don't want you to get hurt either. Camilla swallowed, nodding, because the truth was, she didn't know if she could protect herself from this. That evening, the house was eerily silent. Camilla found herself wandering the halls, the stillness making her restless. She hadn't lived in silence for so long. Even at her worst, there had always been noise, city sounds, the murmurs of strangers passing by, the distant hum of life continuing, even when hers had felt like it was falling apart. But here, it was just emptiness. She turned a corner, pausing outside what she knew was Hudson's room. She didn't know why she stopped, but something pulled her there. Something that made her hesitate before reaching for the doorknob. It was slightly open. She knew she shouldn't, but she did. The room was not what she expected. It was large, but not extravagant. Dark furniture, a perfectly made bed, a single framed photograph on the nightstand. And then she saw it. The crib. Her breath caught. Against the far wall, half covered by a draped sheet, was a baby's crib. It looked untouched, its white paint still perfect, as if it had never been used. Her chest tightened as she stepped closer, fingers brushing the edge of the frame. She could almost feel it, the life that was supposed to exist here, the love that had once filled these walls before it had been stolen away. This was his ghost. This was what he had been trying to outrun. A voice startled her. You shouldn't be in here. Camilla turned sharply, her heart hammering. Hudson stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, but his body rigid. She swallowed hard. I don't talk about that room. His voice was quiet, but firm. Camilla glanced back at the crib, then back at him. I wasn't trying to... It's fine. He cut her off, but it wasn't. She could see it in his eyes. For the first time she saw guilt, raw and unfiltered. She hesitated. You kept it. Hudson didn't move. I couldn't get rid of it. A beat of silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. Finally, Camilla took a slow breath. Hudson, keeping this doesn't mean you failed them. Something flickered across his face. Pain, resistance, something deeper. You should go, he said quietly. Camilla didn't push. Not now. Instead, she gave him a small nod, stepping past him toward the door. But as she left, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just seen the truest version of him, the man behind the walls, and she wasn't sure either of them were ready for what that meant. The sound of the rain tapping against the windows filled the silence of the house. Camilla sat curled up on the plush couch in the living room, absently running a hand over her stomach. The babies were more active tonight, little flutters and kicks pressing against her ribs, as if they could sense the shift in the air. She couldn't stop thinking about last night, about the room, the untouched crib, the way Hudson had looked at her, his expression a carefully controlled mask, but his eyes betraying something raw, something broken. She hadn't meant to pry. She hadn't meant to step into a part of his life that he had clearly locked away. But now that she couldn't unsee it. A part of her wanted to talk to him, to say something. But he had made it clear. Some doors weren't meant to be opened. The front door opened suddenly and she startled, sitting up as Hudson walked in, shaking the rain from his coat. His dark hair was slightly damp, strands falling messily across his forehead. He loosened his tie with one hand, his expression unreadable as he glanced at her. You're still awake, he said, his voice low. She shrugged. Couldn't sleep. Hudson nodded, draping his coat over a chair before heading toward the kitchen. He moved like he always did, controlled, precise, distant. But tonight, something was different. Camilla hesitated, then slowly stood, following him. She leaned against the doorway as she watched him pull a glass from the cabinet and pour himself a drink. "You want one?" he asked without looking at her. She arched a brow. "You're offering a pregnant woman alcohol?" For the first time in what felt like forever, the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Tea, then," he said. Camilla exhaled, crossing her arms. That would be a better offer. Hudson moved silently, filling the kettle and setting it on the stove. The soft whistle of the gas burner filled the quiet between them. She watched him closely, waiting. Finally she spoke. "You were different at the hospital." Hudson stilled. His hands braced against the counter, his back to her. Camilla took a slow step forward. "You're different here." A muscle in his jaw ticked, but he didn't respond. "I'm not asking you to explain anything to me," she continued softly. I need to know if I'm making this harder for you." His shoulders tensed. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then, finally, he turned to face her. His blue eyes were unreadable, but something simmered beneath the surface. "You're not making anything harder for me," he said, his voice quiet. "I was this way long before you got here." Camilla searched his face, trying to understand him, trying to piece together the contradictions. The man who held himself at a distance, yet offered her a home. The man who seemed untouchable, yet watched her with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Then why are you helping me?" she asked. Hudson's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he said something that made her stomach tighten. "I don't know." Camilla swallowed hard. He didn't know. He wasn't helping her out of obligation, or guilt, or some need to fix what he had lost. He was helping her because he wanted to. The thought made her chest ache. The kettle whistled, breaking the moment. Hudson turned, shutting off the burner and pouring the tea into a cup. He slid it toward her without a word, then leaned back against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest. Camilla hesitated before wrapping her hands around the warm mug. She let the silence stretch, let the weight of what had just passed between them settle. Then, softly, she said, "I'm not expecting anything from you, Hudson." His jaw clenched. "I know. And I'm not trying to make this complicated. I know that too." Camilla exhaled, looking down at the tea. "Then why does it feel complicated?" Hudson didn't answer, and that was answer enough. The rain had stopped by the time Camilla made her way back to her room. She stood by the window for a long time, staring out at the city lights, her thoughts tangled. She had spent so long fighting to survive, so long being alone, that she had forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone. And Hudson, as distant and frustrating as he was, made her feel like she mattered, even if neither of them knew what to do with it. A soft knock at the door made her jump. She turned just as Hudson stepped inside, his expression unreadable. Her heart thudded. Something wrong. He hesitated for half a second before shaking his head. "No." Camilla swallowed. "Then why are you here?" Hudson's gaze flickered toward the window, then back to her. He looked like a man standing at the edge of something, unsure whether to step forward or step back. His voice trailed off, and he exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Good night, Camilla." And then, before she could respond, he turned and walked away. Camilla stared after him, her chest tightening, because now she was sure of one thing. Hudson Harrington wasn't just offering her a place to stay. He was trying to figure out how to let her in. The weight of Jake's phone call clung to Camilla long after she had hung up. The words echoed in her mind, circling like a storm she couldn't escape. "You can't keep them from me." She sat at the kitchen island, gripping her mug of tea, though she had long since stopped drinking it. The warmth had faded. The nervous energy in her chest had not. Across the room, Hudson leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his expression unreadable but sharp. She could feel the tension rolling off of him in waves. How likely is it that he'll actually follow through? His voice was calm, but there was something else beneath it. Something controlled, restrained. Camilla swallowed. I don't know. He's impulsive, unpredictable. Hudson's jaw tightened. That's not reassuring. She let out a humorless breath. Yeah, tell me about it. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Hudson pushed off the counter and walked toward her, placing both hands flat against the island. He wasn't touching her, wasn't even particularly close, but his presence was undeniable. I need you to listen to me, he said, his voice quiet, but firm. I don't care what Jake thinks he's entitled to. He doesn't get to walk back into your life and make demands. Camilla's fingers tightened around her mug. Legally, he can. Hudson's eyes darkened. Legally, you have a case against him. He abandoned you. He left you to fend for yourself while carrying his children. That's not fatherly concern, Camilla. That's regret. Her stomach twisted. Because he was right. Jake hadn't called because he suddenly cared. He had called because he had realized, too late, what he had given up. I don't want to fight him, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Hudson exhaled slowly. Then don't. Her head snapped up, confusion flickering across her face. What? You don't have to fight him, he said simply. You just have to be smarter than him. She blinked. Hudson, I don't think... You need a lawyer, he interrupted, already reaching for his phone. Not later, now. Camilla's heart pounded. Hudson, I know someone, he said, typing quickly. Her name is Rachel Quinn. She specializes in family law and has handled cases like this before. Camilla hesitated. She hadn't even let herself think that far ahead yet. Hadn't allowed herself to accept that this might turn into a legal battle. But Hudson already had, because he wasn't letting her do this alone. She swallowed, looking up at him. I can't afford a lawyer. Hudson's eyes flicked to hers, steady and unwavering. I can. Her breath hitched. I can't let you do that. Too bad. His voice was calm, but final. Camilla let out a shaky breath. Hudson, you can't afford to not take this seriously, he cut in, his tone dropping just slightly. Softer now, but no less firm. And I can't afford to sit back and watch you get hurt because of pride. Her throat tightened. He was all in. She wasn't sure when it had happened, when she had become someone he was willing to fight for. But she could feel it. Hudson wasn't going anywhere. She lowered her gaze, staring at the marble countertop, emotions swirling too fast, too heavy. Finally, she let out a breath. Okay. Hudson nodded once, decisive, then pressed a few more buttons on his phone before holding it to his ear. Camilla watched as he paced slightly, his voice shifting into businesslike efficiency. Rachel, it's Hudson Harrington. I have a case for you. A pause. Not mine. Someone important to me. Camilla's breath caught. Someone important. She barely heard the rest of the conversation, her pulse thrumming too loudly in her ears. It was ridiculous, really. This wasn't anything. Hudson was helping because that's who he was. He was a man who stepped in when others wouldn't. A man who didn't walk away when things got complicated. But still, the way he had said it, someone important to me. It settled deep inside her chest, warm and dangerous. By the time Hudson ended the call, she had managed to school her expression. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and met her gaze. She's going to look over your situation and advise the best course of action. Camilla nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Thank you. Hudson studied her for a moment, then exhaled. Try to get some rest. Camilla wanted to argue. Rest? After this? but he was already turning toward the hallway, retreating like he always did when things got too real. And this time, she let him go. Because Hudson wasn't the only one fighting emotions he didn't know how to handle. The tension in the air was suffocating. Camilla sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped together in her lap, trying to steady the storm brewing inside her. The reality of Jake's sudden reappearance had settled in, and no matter how many times she told herself to stay calm, the fear wouldn't go away. Across the room, Hudson stood near the window, phone in hand, his sharp blue eyes scanning something on the screen. He had been on edge since the phone call last night, since the moment she had uttered Jake's name. His protectiveness was both comforting and terrifying, because the more he involved himself in this, the more tangled their lives became. And she wasn't sure what scared her more, losing the fight against Jake, or getting too close to Hudson and losing something even bigger. "Rachel is sending over the preliminary paperwork," Hudson finally said, his voice even, controlled. "We'll go over everything with her before any decisions are made." Camilla nodded slowly, though the words barely registered. "Right." Hudson turned to her then, setting his phone down. His gaze flickered over her face, assessing. "You didn't sleep." She exhaled, rubbing her temple. "Did you expect me to?" His jaw tightened slightly. "You should try to rest." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Yeah, let me just turn off my brain and pretend my ex isn't suddenly interested in my children." Hudson's expression darkened at that. He crossed the room in a few slow strides until he was standing directly in front of her. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice quieter now. Camilla swallowed hard. "It feels like I am." "You're not." The certainty in his voice made something tighten in her chest. She wanted to believe him. But deep down, a voice whispered, "What happens when this is over? When you're no longer his problem?" She dropped her gaze, staring at her hands. "I don't know what Jake wants." Hudson exhaled, shaking his head. "Yes, you do." Camilla frowned, looking up. "He wants control," Hudson continued. "It's not about the twins. It's about you. He doesn't like that you moved on without him, that you're stronger than he remembers. And now he's trying to reinsert himself into your life because he realizes what he lost." The words struck deep because they were true. Jake had never wanted to be a father. He had wanted freedom. And now, after all this time, he had decided he wanted a say in her life again. Her stomach twisted. What if the court listens to him? Hudson's gaze hardened. "They won't." She let out a shaky breath. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do," he countered. "Because I'm not going to let that happen." Her breath caught. The way he said it, so firm, so certain, as if this wasn't just her battle anymore, as if it was theirs. The space between them felt charged, thick with something unspoken. Camilla knew she should look away, should put some kind of distance between them before she said something she couldn't take back. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "Why do you care so much?" Hudson inhaled slowly, as if considering his answer. Then, just as he opened his mouth, the doorbell rang. The moment between them shattered. Camilla flinched, her pulse spiking. Hudson immediately straightened, his entire demeanor shifting into something colder, sharper. He didn't speak, just turned and strode toward the door, his movements controlled but tense. Camilla rose from the couch, her stomach twisting with unease as she followed him down the hallway. The second Hudson pulled the door open, her breath caught in her throat. Jake stood on the other side. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. "Hey, Camilla." His voice was casual, too casual, as if they were old friends catching up. But Camilla knew better. Jake had always been good at pretending. She swallowed, her fingers curling into her sweater. "What are you doing here?" Jake's lips twitched. "Come on, is that any way to greet me?" Hudson stepped forward slightly, his posture tense. You weren't invited. Jake's gaze flicked to Hudson, his smile widening slightly. Ah, the good doctor. Hudson didn't react, didn't even blink. Leave, Jake chuckled, shoving his hands into his pockets. Relax, I just wanted to talk. There's nothing to talk about, Hudson said coolly. Jake ignored him, his eyes settling back on Camilla. You never answered my question. Are you staying here? Camilla's stomach knotted. She knew what he was doing. He wanted her to admit it, to say it out loud so he could use it against her. Hudson, however, didn't give her the chance. Where she stays is none of your concern, he said, his tone dangerously smooth. Jake's jaw ticked slightly, but he forced a laugh. I think it is. She's carrying my kids, after all. Camilla flinched. She hated that word, that claim. Hudson, however, remained eerily calm. You should leave now. Jake exhaled, rocking back on his heels. Look, I don't want to make this difficult. Hudson arched a brow. Then don't. Jake chuckled again, but there was no real amusement behind it. You really don't like me, do you, Doc? Hudson's expression didn't change. No. Camilla swore she saw something flicker in Jake's eyes, something calculating. He turned back to her, tilting his head. You really think he's going to save you, Camilla? Her breath caught, but before she could say anything, Hudson took a step forward, and suddenly Jake wasn't smirking anymore. I think, Hudson said, his voice low and steady, that you should leave before I make you. Camilla's stomach twisted. Jake held Hudson's gaze for a long moment, his jaw tightening. Then finally he took a step back. All right, he murmured, lifting his hands slightly. I can take a hint. But just before he turned to leave, he looked at Camilla one last time. This isn't over, he said, voice quiet but certain. And then he was gone. The second the door shut, Camilla exhaled sharply, her entire body trembling. Hudson turned to her immediately. Are you okay? She swallowed hard, nodding, but she wasn't, because she knew Jake. And when he said, this isn't over, he meant it. The silence in the house felt heavier than it had ever been. Camilla stood frozen in the hallway, her pulse still racing from Jake's visit, her body still trembling from the weight of his last words. This isn't over. No matter how many times she replayed them in her head, the meaning didn't change. Jake wasn't going to let this go. She pressed a hand against her belly, her fingers instinctively curling over the small but steady movements of the twins inside her. She couldn't let him win. Hudson was still by the door, his jaw clenched, his entire body stiff as he stared at the space where Jake had stood just moments ago. The quiet fury radiating off him was palpable, controlled, but barely. Camilla forced herself to take a breath. What do we do now? Hudson exhaled slowly, dragging a hand through his hair before turning to face her. I'll handle it. His voice was calm, but the sharp edge beneath it sent a shiver down her spine. Camilla frowned. Hudson, I mean it. His gaze met hers, unwavering, unshakable. He's not getting near you. Or the babies. A lump formed in her throat. He said it like it was his fight, like this was something he wouldn't let happen, no matter what it took. Camilla swallowed hard, shaking her head. It's not that simple. He has rights. He gave up his rights the moment he abandoned you. His voice was low, but there was something underneath it, something raw. She hesitated. You can't just make him disappear, Hudson. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he exhaled sharply and walked into the living room, pulling out his phone. She followed him, her heart pounding. What are you doing? Calling Rachel, he muttered, already dialing. Camilla ran a hand over her face, frustration bubbling up. I don't want this to turn into some legal battle. Hudson's eyes snapped to hers. You think he's just going to go away if you ignore him? She flinched, because she knew the answer. Jake wasn't someone who walked away. And now, after all this time, he had leverage. Hudson took a slow breath, forcing his voice to steady. I know this is overwhelming, but waiting isn't an option. Camilla hesitated, staring at him, trying to process everything. Hudson wasn't just stepping in to help. He wasn't just offering legal advice or making sure she had a safe place to stay. He was protecting her. Like this was his fight too. She had spent so long alone, carrying this burden without anyone to share the weight. But now, she wasn't alone anymore. And that terrified her just as much as Jake did. The next morning, Camilla woke to the soft hum of voices coming from downstairs. She blinked against the morning light, groggy from a restless night of tossing and turning. Slowly, she sat up, pressing a hand to her stomach. The twins had been restless too, or maybe that was just her. She pulled on a cardigan over her tank top, then padded toward the hallway, her bare feet silent against the polished floors. As she descended the staircase, she recognized the voice immediately. Rachel. She hesitated at the bottom step, watching as Hudson and Rachel sat in the living room, their conversation low and serious. Rachel caught sight of her first, offering a small, reassuring smile. Good morning, she greeted. Camilla forced a breath, stepping forward. Morning. Hudson's gaze flicked to her, his expression unreadable. Rachel's going to walk us through our options. Camilla nodded slowly, settling onto the couch across from them. She felt exposed, like the walls she had carefully built around this situation were crumbling too fast for her to stop them. Rachel pulled out a stack of papers, placing them on the coffee table. I reviewed Jake's history. He hasn't filed anything yet, which is good. That gives us an advantage. Camilla's stomach twisted. But he could. Rachel nodded. Yes, but he's also been absent for over a year. That works in our favor. Hudson leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. How do we make sure he doesn't get any control over this? Camilla swallowed hard. She hated this. All of it. She didn't want to fight. Didn't want to drag her babies through a custody battle before they had even entered the world. Rachel's voice was gentle. Camilla, do you want Jake involved in their lives? The question hit like a punch, because for the first time, she had to say it out loud. No, she didn't want him involved. Not after everything. Not after he had left. Not after he had let her break, alone and terrified, while he had moved on. She inhaled shakily. I don't. Rachel nodded as if she had expected that. Then we start with filing for sole custody. Camilla's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to nod. She wasn't fighting Jake. She was fighting for her children. Hudson sat back, watching her carefully. We'll do whatever it takes. The way he said it, so final, so absolute, made her stomach tighten. This wasn't just about legalities anymore. This was personal, for both of them. Rachel slid a document across the table. This will be the first step. If he contests it, we'll be ready. Camilla reached forward, her fingers brushing against the paper. Her past had been chasing her for so long, and for the first time, she was ready to stop running. She picked up the pen, and she signed. The air in the room felt different after that, lighter, stronger. Rachel gathered the documents, nodding in approval. I'll get this filed right away. Camilla exhaled, the weight on her chest shifting. She had been afraid, but now she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. As Rachel stood to leave, Hudson followed her toward the door, speaking in low tones. Camilla stayed on the couch, trying to process everything. Then, a moment later, Hudson returned, his expression unreadable. She met his gaze. That was the right thing to do, right? Hudson sat beside her, close but not too close. Yes, Camilla exhaled, rubbing her hands over her belly. I don't want to live my life scared. Hudson's voice was softer now. You won't have to. Her throat tightened. because when he said things like that, it made her want to believe him. She turned to look at him, and for a brief moment, there was something between them, something undeniable. But before she could say anything, before she could even think, Hudson spoke again. "You should rest." Camilla swallowed. Yeah. She wasn't sure if she could, because something was changing, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. The evening air was crisp as Camilla stepped onto the balcony, wrapping her cardigan tighter around her body. The city lights stretched beyond the skyline, shimmering against the dark canvas of the night. Chicago was alive, always moving, always buzzing. But up here, above it all, there was an odd sense of stillness. A moment of quiet she hadn't felt in a long time. She needed it. Her fingers curled over the railing, the cold metal grounding her. The weight of everything, the custody filing, Jake's unexpected return, the way Hudson had stepped in without hesitation, pressed against her chest. And then there was him. Hudson. She had told herself that this arrangement was temporary, that she was just passing through his life until she could stand on her own again. But he wasn't making it easy. Not when he kept looking at her like that. Not when he kept stepping in. Not just because he could, but because he wanted to. She heard the sound of footsteps behind her and knew immediately who it was. She didn't turn around, didn't need to. "I figured you'd be out here," Hudson said, his voice quiet. Camilla inhaled, her breath visible in the cool night air. Couldn't sleep. Hudson leaned against the railing beside her, his shoulder just inches from hers. Neither could I. They stood there for a long moment, staring out at the city. The tension between them was different tonight. He wasn't just the man who had taken her in, and she wasn't just the woman who had nowhere else to go. Somehow along the way, they had become something more. Camilla swallowed. "Rachel thinks Jake might file for visitation." Hudson's jaw tensed, his fingers pressing against the railing. "He won't win." Her lips parted, but she hesitated. She didn't doubt that Hudson believed that. But Jake had a way of getting under people's skin, twisting things, turning situations into something they weren't. "I just don't want the babies caught in the middle of this," she admitted. Hudson turned his head slightly, his gaze lingering on her. "That's why I won't let that happen." Camilla let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "You say that like you can control the universe." Hudson smirked slightly. "I don't need to control the universe, just this situation." His confidence should have been frustrating. It should have annoyed her, the way he always seemed so certain. But instead, it made her feel safe. Camilla shifted, exhaling slowly. "I'm just, tired of feeling like my life is being dictated by other people." Hudson was silent for a moment. Then he turned to face her fully. "Then take it back," he said simply. She looked up at him, her brows furrowing. "What?" Hudson's gaze didn't waver. "Take your life back, Camilla. Stop letting people like Jake make decisions for you. Stop waiting for the worst to happen and start deciding how this goes." Her breath hitched, because no one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever looked at her like she was capable of winning. Hudson took a slow step closer, his presence undeniable now. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he murmured. Camilla's heart pounded, because suddenly this wasn't about Jake anymore. Suddenly this was about them. The air between them felt charged, electric, terrifying. She swallowed. "Hudson." But she didn't know what to say, because she knew if she let herself fall, there would be no going back. And the way he was looking at her now, like he was barely holding himself back, made her wonder if he had already made that decision for both of them. Then, slowly, deliberately, Hudson reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered for just a second too long. Camilla's breath caught. This was dangerous. This was something she couldn't undo. She should have stepped back. should have reminded herself that they were standing on a line that, once crossed, would change everything. But instead, she did something reckless. She leaned in, just enough for Hudson to notice, just enough for his gaze to flicker down to her lips. For a moment, neither of them moved, neither of them breathed, and then Hudson stepped back. Camilla blinked, her heart slamming against her ribs. Hudson exhaled, running a hand over his jaw. "We should go inside." Her stomach twisted. She nodded, stepping away from the railing. "Yeah." Neither of them spoke as they walked back into the house, and neither of them acknowledged the fact that, for a moment, they had been standing on the edge of something unstoppable. But even if they weren't ready to admit it, they both knew the truth. There was no walking away from this. The tension between them was unbearable. Camilla could still feel the ghost of Hudson's touch against her skin, the way his fingers had lingered when he tucked her hair behind her ear, the way his eyes had darkened, his breathing had slowed, as if he were fighting against something he didn't want to fight anymore. And yet, he had stepped back, pulled away, like whatever was between them was too dangerous to acknowledge. Now, the silence in the house was suffocating. She sat curled up on the couch, pretending to scroll through her phone, while Hudson stood near the window, his posture tense, his gaze fixed on something outside. They hadn't spoken about what had almost happened on the balcony. They weren't going to, because if they did, it would make it real. And if it was real, she didn't know what would happen next. She let out a slow breath, breaking the silence first. "Did Rachel say when we should expect a response from Jake's lawyer?" Hudson's gaze flicked toward her, his expression carefully neutral. "By the end of the week." Camilla nodded, gripping her phone tighter. "Good." Hudson hesitated, then ran a hand through his hair. "If he contests, we'll be ready." She swallowed. "And if he doesn't?" Hudson's jaw tensed. "Then we move forward, get full custody locked in, end this before it begins." She wanted to believe it would be that simple, but nothing about Jake had ever been simple. A lump formed in her throat. "I don't know why this is happening now. I don't understand what he wants." Hudson turned to her fully, his voice low. "He wants control, Camilla. He sees that you don't need him anymore, that you survived without him, and he hates that." Her chest tightened, because deep down she knew Hudson was right. Jake didn't love the babies. He didn't love her. He just didn't want to feel like he had lost. She looked down, her fingers curling over her stomach protectively. "I just want to be done with him." Hudson exhaled, his voice quieter now. "You will be." The certainty in his voice made something deep inside her ache, because Hudson wasn't just saying it, he believed it. She lifted her gaze, locking eyes with him. "You keep saying that like you can control the outcome." He didn't blink. "I can't control everything, but I can control what happens to you." Her breath hitched, her fingers clenched in the fabric of her sweater. The air between them felt thick again, heavy with all the things they weren't saying. Camilla forced herself to look away, to break whatever this was before it consumed her. But before she could, Hudson spoke again. "There's something I need to ask you." She hesitated. "What?" Hudson was quiet for a moment, as if carefully choosing his words. Then he took a slow breath. "What happens after this?" Camilla blinked. "What do you mean?" His jaw tightened slightly. "When this is over. When Jake is out of the picture. What happens next?" Her stomach twisted. She knew what he was asking, because the truth was, she didn't know. She had been so focused on surviving, on keeping her baby safe, that she hadn't let herself think about what came after, where she would go, what she would do, and if that life would include Hudson. She swallowed hard. I haven't thought that far ahead." Hudson's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered behind his eyes. Maybe you should, he said quietly. A strange, uneasy feeling settled in her chest, like he was trying to prepare her for something, like he was trying to prepare himself. Camilla wet her lips, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you asking me to leave? Hudson's jaw clenched. No. But something about the way he said it made her stomach tighten. Because he wasn't asking her to leave. But he wasn't asking her to stay either. And for the first time, she realized that no matter how much Hudson had done for her, no matter how much he had been there, he was still keeping a part of himself locked away. And maybe, just maybe, he always would. The thought made her chest ache. She forced a small, hollow smile. Well, I guess I have some thinking to do. Hudson's eyes flickered, something unreadable passing through them. Then, finally, he nodded. Yeah, you do. Camilla swallowed past the lump in her throat and turned away. And even though they were standing in the same room, breathing the same air, it had never felt like they were farther apart. The nursery was bathed in soft golden light from the setting sun, casting long shadows across the walls. Camilla stood by the crib, her hands resting on the edge as she stared down at the space that would soon hold her babies. The room had been empty for so long, untouched, a ghost of a life Hudson had once dreamed of. But now, it belonged to them. She ran her fingers over the soft blanket folded neatly inside, her heart full and aching at the same time. It was over. The custody filing had been approved. Jake had backed down before it even reached the courtroom. Whether it was because of the legal pressure Hudson had put on him, or because he had simply lost interest, she didn't know. And honestly, she didn't care. She was free. No more looking over her shoulder. No more waiting for the past to catch up to her. And yet, even as relief settled over her, another weight pressed down on her chest. Because now, there was only one question left to answer. What happens next? She had spent so much time surviving, so much time fighting for stability, that she hadn't let herself think about what came after, what her life looked like beyond the battle, and where Hudson fit into it. A soft knock at the door made her turn. Hudson stood in the doorway, his hands tucked into his pockets, his blue eyes unreadable as they locked onto hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, "It's done," he said, his voice quiet. Camilla exhaled slowly, nodding. "Yeah, it is." She should have been happy. She should have felt weightless, but all she felt was uncertain. Hudson stepped forward, stopping just a few feet away from her. His presence, his warmth, it was all so familiar now, like she had always known him, like she had always belonged in his world. Except she didn't. Did she? Camilla swallowed. I guess that means I should start thinking about where to go from here. Hudson's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained even. If that's what you want. Her stomach twisted. I don't know what I want. Hudson hesitated. Then stay. Her breath hitched. Two simple words. A choice, an offer, a chance at something neither of them had ever planned for. Camilla searched his face, looking for the answer to the question she'd been too afraid to ask. What happens if I do? She whispered. Hudson's eyes softened, but his hands clenched at his sides, like he was forcing himself to stay still. I don't know, he admitted, but I want to find out. Camilla's throat tightened. He wasn't promising her forever. He wasn't making grand declarations or sweeping romantic gestures. But he was asking her to stay, to stop running, to take a risk. Her chest ached, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She wanted to take that risk, for her babies, for him. Camilla took a slow step forward, closing the space between them. Hudson. He inhaled sharply, his entire body going still as she lifted her hand, pressing it gently against his chest. His heartbeat was steady, strong. Her voice trembled. I don't know how to do this. Hudson's fingers wrapped around hers, his grip firm, reassuring. "Then let's figure it out together," he murmured. And just like that, the walls between them finally crumbled. Camilla let out a shaky breath, letting go of the fear. Letting go of the idea that she had to be alone, because she wasn't. Not anymore. And as Hudson pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers, she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was home.